What happens when your first love comes back 14 years later, with a sick dog, 2 suspicious men, and a name that may not be his? Jennifer Adams, 29, veterinarian, had plans for Easter Sunday night. They involved balloon pajamas, microwave popcorn, and her Scottish fold, Cleo. It was a small, quiet plan, but the night had other ideas. If you're Jennifer Adams, you save the dog first. Then you try not to stare at the man. Then you fail. Because Nick Brown used to be her skinny, nerdy best friend in wire-rimmed glasses, her first kiss, and the boy who vanished so completely the next morning that for years she half wondered if she'd imagined him. Now he walks back into her life broader, sharper, with deep green eyes, expensive cologne, and the kind of dangerous appeal that makes women look twice. And the problem was, Nick Brown had grown up into a Mafia boss named Dominic, which really should have made the whole thing less irresistible than it was. It did not. And before long, Jennifer Adams was going to discover 3 things. Nick Brown was hiding something. The dog was innocent. And the 2 men named Tom and Jerry were somehow not the weirdest part of this story. Jen pulled herself off the couch, padded to the window, and looked down at the street. 2 men stood at the door to her veterinary clinic, and between them, a large German shepherd was doing something no large German shepherd should be doing on a public sidewalk at this hour. She grabbed her robe off the hook, pulled it over her pajamas, the balloon ones, God help her, and went downstairs. She unlocked the clinic door and opened it 6 inches. "Gentlemen, it's 11:45, we're closed." The taller one spoke first. He was enormous, somewhere north of 6 feet, with the kind of stillness that made rooms feel smaller. "Are you the veterinarian?" "I am, and we open at—" "The dog's been sick for 2 hours." His voice was flat and factual, the way people stated things they considered non-negotiable. "He needs help now." Before Jen could answer, the shorter one, compact, quick-eyed, with the energy of someone who had spent his whole life slightly ahead of himself, stepped forward and nudged the larger man aside. He looked at the sign beside her door, then back at her with a smile so aggressively charming it had clearly been practiced. "Miss Adams." "Hi, I'm Jerry." He pressed a hand to his chest, then gestured to the large man behind him. "And that's Tom. We're really sorry about the hour, and I completely understand if this is an inconvenience for you, but our boss's dog has been vomiting for 2 hours. And if anything happens to this animal, our boss will send us somewhere very unpleasant, without wings." He paused. "Metaphorically." Jen looked at the large one, then the small one. "Tom and Jerry?" Jerry pointed at her. "Yeah." "Huh." She looked at the dog, who chose that moment to heave dramatically onto the sidewalk. She opened the door the rest of the way. The examination took 15 minutes. Caesar, which was apparently the dog's name, delivered by Jerry with the same casual confidence someone might say Dave or Buddy, was a beautiful animal under normal circumstances. Currently he was miserable, pressing his head against Jen's hand with the resigned dignity of someone who knew things had gone very wrong and was trying not to make a fuss about it. She ran her hands along his abdomen, checked his gums, listened to his gut sounds, and then wheeled the ultrasound over. "Okay," she said quietly, adjusting the probe and watching the screen. "There's something in there." "Something," Jerry repeated, "in his stomach, something that isn't food." She tilted her head. "Do you know what he might have swallowed? Did he get into anything? A toy, maybe? Some kind of—" She leaned closer to the screen. "It's soft," she murmured, adjusting the probe. "Rubbery, silicone maybe, like a chew toy. Or—" she squinted at the shape on the screen, "one of those slime things kids make." Tom's expression shifted in a way that had nothing to do with slime. Jerry smiled too fast. "Yes, exactly. Slime. He's a slime guy." Jen looked at him. "A slime guy. Big fan. Can't get enough of it." Jen straightened up and looked at them both with the calm, pleasant expression she used when she was fairly sure she wasn't getting the whole story. "Well, whatever it is, it needs to come out tonight." She pulled off her gloves and reached for the intake form. You said your boss owns the dog. I need him here in person. Signature, paperwork, and a conversation about what Caesar has access to and why. She set the clipboard on the counter. I don't do the surgery until he walks through that door. Those are my terms. Jerry looked at her for a moment, then at Tom, then back at her. He pulled out his phone. The call lasted under 30 seconds. When he hung up, his expression had the particular quality of a man who had just made someone else's evening significantly worse. 15 minutes. Jen nodded and went to prepare the surgical suite, leaving Tom and Jerry in the waiting area with its cheerful educational posters about heartworm prevention and dental hygiene for small animals. When she glanced back through the glass, they were sitting side by side on the plastic chairs with the slightly stunned expressions of men who were not accustomed to being told to wait anywhere. She found herself almost smiling. Almost. It was Cleo who destroyed the relative peace of the next 10 minutes. The cat had slipped downstairs the way she always did, silently, inevitably, like a small white opinion with legs, and had discovered Caesar before Jen noticed her. What happened next was less a confrontation than a diplomatic incident. Cleo landed squarely on Caesar's back. Caesar, already miserable and deeply undignified, scrambled to his feet. Within seconds, all three humans had converged on the animals from different directions, Jen calling Cleo, Tom and Jerry calling Caesar, which, given the names, gave the whole scene the energy of a very low-budget historical epic. It accomplished nothing except distributing the chaos more evenly across the room. Nobody heard the clinic door open over the noise, but everyone felt it. One word, cut through the noise, low, certain, the kind of voice that had never once needed volume to be heard. Caesar. The dog went still. Then he shook himself free of 3 sets of hands and crossed the room in 4 long strides, tail moving for the first time all evening, and pressed his entire face into the man's hands. Good boy. The man crouched, both hands on the dog's head, forehead briefly against the dog's. I've got you. Tom and Jerry were on their feet. Jen pushed her hair back and looked up from the floor where she'd landed, robe half off one shoulder, one sock completely missing. He was crouching on her clinic floor with his forehead pressed against a sick German shepherd's face and somehow making it look like a cologne ad. Green eyes, the kind of face that made you forget what you'd been about to say, and then get annoyed at yourself for forgetting. He was looking at Caesar with the specific tenderness that people reserved for things they would genuinely fall apart without. It was deeply irritating, actually, how much of that worked. Then he looked at her. Are you the veterinarian? The voice hit her, somewhere between her sternum and her memory, and for a moment she couldn't locate the correct decade. Her hands stopped moving. She looked up slowly, the way you do when your eyes need a second to confirm what your brain is already doing something embarrassing about. Nick? The word came out barely above a breath. Oh my God. Nick? His eyes sharpened. Something moved across his face. Recognition. Then something harder and faster underneath it. Jen? They stared at each other, across a veterinary clinic at midnight on Easter Sunday, surrounded by a nauseated German shepherd, a smug Scottish fold, and 2 men named Tom and Jerry. No way, they said at exactly the same moment. Jen took 2 steps toward him. He took 1 toward her, and 14 years collapsed into about 3 feet of fluorescent-lit veterinary clinic. Oh my God! Her voice landed somewhere between a laugh and complete disbelief, her hand going to her mouth for a second before she pulled it back. Nick Brown, I cannot believe. It's been 14 years. 14 years! His eyes went from her face to the balloon pajamas to the one missing sock and back to her face, and whatever he'd been about to say died somewhere in the journey. You look... He stopped, started again. Different. She hit his shoulder, not hard. Just 14 years of you could have at least called. Tom's hand moved toward his jacket. Jerry stepped between them before anyone could blink. Nick raised one hand in Tom's direction, eyes still on Jen, and Tom went still. Behind them, Tom leaned toward Jerry. Who's Nick Brown? Nick, Jerry whispered without moving his lips. Dominic, short version. Keep up. Why didn't you say goodbye? The amusement had left Jen's voice now. One night and the house was just... empty. You didn't even... I know. He let the words land without dressing them up. I was going to call. My father had just died and everything fell apart at once and I... He stopped, something crossing his face briefly before he pulled it back. I'm really glad to see you. Their eyes held for a moment, the kind of silence that had weight in it. Tom and Jerry stood 18 inches away, with the concentrated expressions of people watching a sport they'd never seen and couldn't score. Caesar solved the stalemate by stepping between them and throwing up on the floor. Oh, God. Jen was already moving. I need to take him in right now. Is surgery actually necessary? Nick looked at the floor, then at her, recalculating. Absolutely. She snapped on fresh gloves, all business now. Whatever he swallowed isn't moving on its own. She glanced up, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. Slime, apparently. You have slime in your apartment? Nick's eyebrows rose. He turned to look at Jerry. Jerry spread both hands wide, nothing to add. Sign the intake form, leave your ID, and wait here. She had Caesar's lead and the surgery room door open. All three of you. The door swung shut. Caesar's claws clicked across tile, then nothing. Nick turned around. His hand closed around Jerry's arm, quiet and deliberate. She knows nothing about me. That stays. His voice was low. No shop talk, no weapons, and the thing Caesar swallowed, that's yours. You left it somewhere you shouldn't have. Nothing to do with me. Are we clear on that? Sure, whatever you say, boss. My name. His eyes moved between them. Not boss, not here, not ever in front of her. Tom processed this carefully. What do we call you? Nick. Jerry's face lit up, and he clapped him on the arm. Easy. We've got this, don't even... Nick looked at him with the expression of a man reconsidering several life choices. Actually, Jerry said, arriving at the obvious conclusion somewhat late, maybe I talk less. Nick didn't answer. He looked down at the spot on the floor where Caesar had made his feelings known, then back up at Jerry. There it is. 40 minutes later, the surgery room door opened. Jen came out in fresh scrubs, set a small steel tray on the counter, and said that Caesar was going to be fine. He'd need to stay the night, drink plenty of water, and whoever had been supervising his choices lately should maybe take a long, hard look in the mirror. Then she picked up the item from the tray with one gloved hand and held it up. It had been used. It was still tied, and printed on the side in the confident font of a company that believed in its product were the letters X and L. Nobody said anything for a moment. So, Jen looked at the three of them with the composed expression of a woman who had not gone to veterinary school for 8 years to end up here. And yet here she was. Not slime. Nick turned to Jerry with the expression of a man who had been handed a golden opportunity and intended to use it fully. Jerry. He shook his head slowly with great sorrow. I told you to watch what Caesar gets into. I told you. Jerry pressed a hand to his chest and shook his head with the gravity of a man confronting genuine personal failure. I know. It was a heated moment. Things got away from me. Jen looked at the item in her hand, then at Jerry, who was standing there at approximately 5'5", chin up, entirely committed to his story, then back at the item, where the label remained legible and the letters XL remained the size they were. Tom looked at Jerry, then at the item in Jen's hand, then at Jerry again, with the slow, methodical attention of a man working through a math problem he hadn't been asked to solve. Big hands, he said finally, and nodded, apparently satisfied. The sound Jen made was not quite a laugh. She set the item back on the tray, pulled off her gloves, and dropped them in the bin. A heated moment, she repeated pleasantly. Jerry nodded with feeling. Very heated. Right. She looked at Nick, who was standing slightly apart from the other two with his arms crossed and something around his mouth that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same building. You're Caesar's father. Who you leave him with is your responsibility. Completely agree. He looked at Jerry with the particular patience of a man who was going to have a very thorough conversation later. Caesar will never be left with Jerry again. Jerry's hand flew up. I saved his life once. Ever. Jerry closed his mouth. Jen smiled, the real kind, fast and unguarded, and slid the intake form across the counter. I think we understand each other. Sign here. I'll take a copy of your ID and you're done. Nick signed, Then he reached into his jacket and paused. Not the pause of a man who had forgotten something. The pause of a man who had just decided he was going to say he had. "I left it in the car." He said it the way people say things they're still constructing, mouth slightly ahead of the plan. "Then go get it." Jen nodded toward the door. "We're not going anywhere." "I meant home, actually." He met her eyes with a straight face, green and entirely steady, as though the correction had always been part of the sentence. "Home, not the car." Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. Jen had spent the better part of a decade learning to read creatures who couldn't tell her what was wrong, and she'd gotten very good at it. Something about this man, about all three of them, honestly, was adding up to a number she didn't quite recognize yet. "Okay, bring it when you pick him up tomorrow." She set the pen down on the counter between them. "I will." The corner of his mouth shifted, and something in his expression settled into a register she remembered from a long time ago. Easy, unhurried, aimed directly at her. "I still can't believe it, Jen." They'd both drifted slightly forward over the counter at some point, neither of them quite noticing when, and the distance between them had become the kind that registered differently than regular distance. His eyes moved over her face in that slow, recalibrating way from earlier, like he was matching a memory to the present and finding the present more interesting. "You're not wearing glasses." She tilted her head slightly, like she was checking something off. "Contacts." His voice dropped half a step. "You don't have braces anymore." 14 years, Nick." "Your teeth." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Look really good, actually." She held his gaze. "Yours did too. Even back then." The words came out before she'd decided to say them, and she didn't take them back. 3 feet away, Tom and Jerry's heads were turning back and forth with the synchronized patience of 2 men watching a tennis match they couldn't score. Jerry leaned 2 inches toward Tom. "Are we supposed to step outside?" Tom said nothing, which was his answer to most things. "Because we have pizza deliv. Jerry." Nick's voice went sideways without him turning his head, low and precise, and Jerry stopped mid-word as though someone had found his off switch. Jen looked at Jerry, then back at Nick, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "Pizza delivery." Jen tilted her head toward Jerry. "Are you in food service?" Nick opened his mouth, then something shifted behind his eyes, quick, private, and the answer he'd been about to give became a different one. "Actually." He nodded once, like he'd just decided something. "Yes, I own a pizza place." Jen stared at him for a moment. "You own a pizza place? Good margins." The corner of his mouth moved. Surprisingly good, actually. Jerry stepped forward with the energy of a man who had been waiting for his moment. "We also export to—" Nick turned his head toward Jerry with a look that could have stopped a clock. Jerry registered it, weighed it, and decided against it. "Italy," he finished anyway. Jen glanced at Jerry, then back at Nick, her expression doing something complicated. "You export pizza to Italy?" "It's a long story." Nick picked up his copy of the intake form. She laughed. The real kind, fast and completely beyond her control. "Your pizza must be genuinely extraordinary." He picked up his copy of the intake form, considered it briefly, and set it back down in a way that closed the topic entirely. "We should let you sleep. You've done more than enough tonight." His eyes found hers and held there a moment, direct and quiet, with something underneath it she didn't have a name for yet. "Thank you. For Caesar." "Noon tomorrow." She stepped back from the counter. "He'll be ready." "I'll be here." He held her gaze 1 second past the end of the sentence, and something in that extra second said more than the words did. Then he turned for the door. Tom and Jerry fell into step behind him without being asked, one to his left, one to his right, half a pace back, and the 3 of them walked out into the empty street. Jen stood at the window, watching them go, a smile on her face she hadn't entirely decided to put there. She turned to Cleo, who had appeared on the windowsill beside her with the silent inevitability of a cat who had been there all along. Who would have thought? Jen shook her head slowly. The nerdy kid with the glasses. Growing up to be that attractive. Cleo meowed. Jen lifted one shoulder. Strange, though. Her eyes drifted back to the empty street. He really doesn't look like someone who works in pizza. When the door closed and Jen disappeared from view, Nick's smile didn't follow him out. Tom moved to his right, Jerry to his left, both half a step back without being asked. 3 men, 1 sidewalk, the formation of people who have spent enough time together that movement becomes a shared language. Boss. Jerry matched his stride, tilting his head with the air of a man expecting a trophy. We played that pretty well in there, didn't we? Nick kept his eyes on the street. Are your weapons loaded? The question landed like a bucket of cold water on a man who had just been very proud of himself. Tom's hand moved toward his jacket. Yes, boss? Jerry blinked, recalibrated. Always. Good. 3 steps of silence. Jerry? His voice stayed flat. Did you have to say pizza delivery? Jerry opened his mouth, closed it, tried a different angle entirely, which was his solution to most problems. Boss, we always call a shipment a pizza delivery. It's been the system since... Tomorrow morning. Nick stopped at the cars and turned, hands in his pockets. First thing, you're buying me a pizza shop. Tom stopped walking. The look he gave Nick, from Tom, was the equivalent of anyone else grabbing someone by the collar. A real pizza shop, boss? A real one. Good neighborhood. Somewhere people actually go for the food. Nick glanced down the block, both directions, automatic. There should be a room in the back, private, door that locks. Something lit up behind Jerry's eyes, the specific look of a man who believes he has been trusted with classified information. He pointed at Nick with both hands. New base, clean cover. Nobody looks twice at a pizza place. His voice dropped, sharing a genuine insight. Nobody suspects a pizza place. Nick looked at him. In New York, everyone suspects a pizza place. They just don't care. As always, Jerry. He pulled open the car door. Incredibly smart. Jerry got in. The SUVs pulled out into the empty street. In the doorway of the building across the road, 2 men stood without moving. One of them raised a phone. Easter Sunday. Midnight. A vet clinic. Neither of them said anything about it. Lorenzo Calvetti was one of New York's wealthiest men, and like most of New York's wealthiest men, he had a library he never read, a fireplace he kept burning regardless of the season, and a very specific rule about phone calls after 10 p.m. He took all of them. Tonight he was waiting for one in particular. He'd had a man on the Ferraros, his oldest rivals, his most persistent problem, and the call was overdue. He was on his 2nd scotch when it finally came in. Boss. The voice belonged to a man Lorenzo had kept precisely because he never editorialized. Ferraro, Brooklyn, a veterinary clinic on Clinton Street. He went in just before midnight with 2 men, stayed close to an hour. Lorenzo didn't respond right away. He worked the glass slowly between his fingers, watching the fire. A veterinarian? He said finally. The man on the line didn't miss a beat. Yes, boss. Small practice, 2 stories, residential street. Lorenzo set the glass down. A vet clinic in Brooklyn. Small, innocent, the kind of place nobody looks at twice. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man confirming something he already knew. Brilliant! He thought about the Ferraro men he'd known, the grandfather and his fish markets, the father and his flower shops. Different decade, different packaging, same instinct. Hide in plain sight. Use something that makes people say, "aw." Did they bring anything in? He asked. Packages, equipment. There was a brief hesitation on the line. Just the dog, boss. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Just the dog, he repeated. He set the glass down slowly. So the dog is the delivery. Silence on the line. Keep your men on it, he said. Every time he goes back. Find out what that clinic handles. X-rays, surgery, what comes in and out. He picked up his glass. The packaging always tells the truth. Lorenzo set the glass down. A knock came at the door. Come in. Ruby Calvetti walked in. Red hair, green eyes, phone in hand. She lowered the phone, smiled the smile she used on everyone, and tucked it away. Lightly, easily, like it was the most natural thing. Uncle Lorenzo, I just came to say good night. Lorenzo looked at his niece. Something shifted behind his eyes. A man, watching a solution, walked through his door. With the warm patience of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Ruby, sweetheart, come here." Ruby crossed the room and perched on the edge of the chair, hands in her lap, every part of her pointed at him with the expression of someone who expects something exciting to happen at any moment. In the tone of a man opening a negotiation he has already won, Lorenzo rubbed his hands together. "You've been saying for a while that you want to help with the business." "Yes," Ruby pressed her lips together, "and every time I ask you say I'm still 24. Lorenzo took her in slowly, green eyes, red hair, long legs. Then, with the measured warmth of someone closing a door, "You were, and now you're not." Ruby held up one finger. "I'm 25, Uncle Lorenzo," with the gravity of a man announcing something historic. "Exactly." He placed both palms on his knees. "Ruby, I think the time has come." "That's incredible." She sat up straighter. "Where do I start? Sales director? Management assistant?" Lorenzo let a beat pass, just long enough. Then, with casual enthusiasm, "Public relations." "Oh," Ruby considered this. "Okay, that could work." Lorenzo raised one finger, his eyes lit up with the energy of a man improving on his own plan. "Actually," he leaned forward, "I need to give you something more specific, more elite." Ruby's chin lifted. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. "Ferraro? Family? Relations?" Ruby's eyes lit up, her whole posture shifting forward. "This sounds important, Uncle," with the quiet certainty of a man who has already decided everything. "Oh, it is." He lowered his voice further. "In fact, this should be a role that not just anyone could do." Ruby's smile turned slow and gratified. The smile of someone being confirmed in something they'd always suspected. With complete conviction, Lorenzo delivered it. "You will be director of Dominic Ferraro Relations." Ruby clapped her hands together once. "I'm starting directly as director." "Oh, absolutely." Ruby leaned forward. "When do I start?" With the warmth of a man who has just moved a chess piece exactly where he wanted it, Lorenzo smiled. "The real one, the full version." "You already have, sweetheart." He settled back, fingers laced together. "I genuinely trust your skills for this." His eyes moved to the fire, his voice shifting to something older, quieter. "Especially the skills you inherited from your mother." Something crossed his face that didn't quite reach his voice. Esmeralda always had a way of making someone feel like the only person in the room. Ruby beamed. "Mom's always been so good with people." "Yes," Lorenzo inhaled. "Let's say that." Ruby squeezed his arm. Lorenzo patted her hand once and let go. "So," Ruby leaned forward, "as director of Dominic Ferraro Relations, what exactly do I need to do?" Lorenzo's smile spread all the way across his face. "Stay well groomed. Dress beautifully." He leaned forward and tapped the arm of the chair once. "And that smile of yours," he winked. "Company image." Ruby threw her arms around him. "Uncle Lorenzo, this is exactly the job I always wanted." "I know, sweetheart." He patted her arm. "Oh, one more thing." He reached for his glass. "Do you have any pets?" Ruby pulled back. "Parakeets, Selena and Justin." Lorenzo's face did something brief. "No, that won't do." He waved a hand. "I'm getting you a dog for your birthday." Ruby blinked. "My birthday is 3 months away." I felt like it. He tilted his head, considering. "Something small and fluffy. It would suit you very well." His eyes moved over her once. "Looks good in meetings." Ruby reacted as though she had just won something very large from a lottery she hadn't known she'd entered. Ruby squeezed his arm with both hands. "You're one of a kind, Uncle Lorenzo." Ruby walked out the way someone does when they've just gotten everything they wanted. Light on her feet, the smile still on her face. The door clicked shut behind her. Lorenzo's eyes moved slowly toward the ceiling, her mother's charm, her father's everything else. He picked up his glass, a smile still on his face, and drank. Jen pulled the sweater over her head, checked the mirror, and pulled it back off. Too much neckline, way too much. She was a veterinarian. She was not going to stand in front of her own mirror at 7 in the morning doing this. She did it twice more before going with the cardigan, buttoned, soft, a little décolleté if she left the top 2 undone, which she did, then immediately redid one, then left it. Professional, she told herself. This is a professional situation. The morning patients came and went. She was present for all of them, hands steady, voice calm, while her mind kept drifting somewhere 14 years back. She'd had her first kiss at 16. Nick Brown, the treehouse, a Tuesday in late October, his wire-rimmed glasses slightly crooked, both of them laughing nervously beforehand and not at all afterward. He'd spent the entire day walking into door frames. Then one morning his house was just empty. She checked the time, 11:47. Very professional, said the part of her brain that hadn't landed anywhere useful all morning. She glanced over at the recovery area. Caesar was doing well, all things considered. On his feet, drinking water, the resigned dignity of a dog ready to put last night behind him. Cleo sat 3 feet from the cage and hadn't moved since 6 that morning. Not hissing, not pacing, just watching Caesar with the unblinking patience of someone who had formed an opinion and was waiting for the right moment to act on it. Across the bridge, Nick stood in front of his bathroom mirror and thought about a girl with braces who had once faced down 3 boys twice her size and told them to find something better to do with their time. She'd been 13. He'd been walking home alone, same as every day. She'd said it the way she said everything, like it was obvious, like why was this even a conversation? 3 years of treehouse conversations, skateboarding in empty parking lots. The night everything changed, and then the morning after, when his father had died and his whole life had dropped into his hands overnight, and there was no version of events where he got to stay. He hadn't called. He'd meant to. That was the truth, and it wasn't enough. He reached for the cologne, then stopped, then reached again. One more spray. He set it down and checked his reflection once, not the way he usually did, quick and functional, and went downstairs. Jerry had the rear door open, his expression already doing something. He opened his mouth the moment Nick appeared. "Nice, boss." His eyes tracked the cologne like a man filing evidence. Nick stopped at the car door. "Jerry, I'm just saying." "You're not saying anything." Nick got in. Jerry got in after him. Wisely silent for the length of time it takes a man to realize silence is the better option, which for Jerry was longer than it should have been. Jen was walking Lady Willow's owner toward the door when Nick arrived. Lady Willow was a Pomeranian with a pink bow between her ears and the worldview of someone who had never once been told no. Her owner was holding the leash with both hands, which said everything. The clinic door opened, and Lady Willow locked onto Nick's leg with the focus of a heat-seeking device and bolted. Her owner let out a delighted laugh. She studied Nick the way people size up things they intend to revisit. Lady Willow knows a good leg when she sees one. She winked at Jen on her way out. Jen held the door for her, very pleasantly, with a smile that stayed exactly where she'd put it. "Oh, he's not available," she thought. The specificity of it caught her off guard. Nick detached Lady Willow from his leg, handed her back without breaking stride, and his eyes found Jen across the room. The smile that crossed his face wasn't the polished version. It was the one she remembered, the one that started slow and got away from him. "Good afternoon." His voice carried the same easy weight it always had, like he'd been planning to show up here all along. "Hi." She walked toward him, and they ended up 2 feet apart, both grinning like idiots, fully aware of it, neither of them stopping. Jen's voice came out a little warmer than she'd intended. "You look really good." A half-second pause. "I mean Caesar. Caesar looks really good. He's recovering fast." Nick smiled. "Glad to hear it." They stood there for a moment, both of them smiling, neither of them in any particular hurry to stop. Jen leaned in slightly. "Tell Jerry, when he's handling personal business, keep Caesar somewhere else. Dogs pick up on these things more than people realize." Nick's expression went completely serious. He nodded once. "Of course. Very unpleasant situation. Caesar should not be exposed to that." Jen turned toward the recovery area. Behind her, Nick stared at the ceiling and shook his head. Caesar heard him before he saw him. He was on his feet before Jen had the cage open, pressing his whole head into Nick's hands the moment they were close enough. "Hey, my boy." Nick crouched, both hands on the dog's face. "He's recovering well." Jen ran a hand along Caesar's back. "But another day or 2 would be safer. Whatever you need. He's been with me since he was 8 weeks. He didn't look up from Caesar. "His father was my father's dog." Her chest did a thing she chose not to examine. At Nick's feet, Cleo had materialized silently and was staring up at him with the focused attention of someone reviewing a very long file. "This is my girl." Jen nodded toward Cleo. Nick glanced down at her, then back up. "We've met. Yesterday she was 3 seconds from taking Caesar apart." He tilted his head. "I thought Scottish folds were easygoing." "Most of them are." Jen crossed her arms, the affection of someone who had long since stopped explaining her cat to anyone. "Cleo didn't get that memo. She's a full-on menace." He was still crouched, one hand resting on Caesar's head, and he was quiet for a moment. The comfortable kind. Then he looked up at her. "Jen, would you want to get dinner sometime?" Not quite a question. It landed like a decision he'd made before he walked in. The heat that moved into her face was immediate and entirely beyond her control. She was almost 30 years old. She owned a business. "Sure." She held his gaze. "Why not?" They faced each other, both grinning again, incredibly stupid, and neither of them minded. He straightened up. "I'll come back for him tomorrow." She walked him to the door. He had his hand on the frame, already half turned toward the street when he glanced back at her. "When I come to pick him up, maybe we make a plan. Do something." Jen tilted her head slightly. The smile arrived before she'd decided on it. "Yeah, maybe we do. Tomorrow, then." He held her gaze 1 second past the word. She nodded. "Tomorrow." He pushed through the door. She stayed in the frame, watching him cross to the car. "Hey, Nick." He turned with a smile on his face. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, one eyebrow up. "The ID." Something crossed his face. Not quite guilt, not quite amusement. One shoulder lifted. "Forgot." "Tomorrow, Nick Brown." She pointed at him, and there was a smile in it she wasn't entirely controlling. "Don't make me ask twice." He held up one hand without turning around and walked back to the car. The door closed. Dominic Ferraro's expression shifted before it was fully shut, back to the one he wore everywhere else, flat and certain, the face that ran operations across 3 states and didn't get second-guessed. He stared at the street ahead. Nick Brown. She still thought that was his name. She thought he ran an export company and a pizza restaurant. She thought Tom and Jerry were his friends. She thought the worst thing about last night was a dog eating a condom. At some point between now and dinner, he was going to have to explain that his name was actually Dominic Ferraro, that the pizza shop was not quite what she was picturing, and that the 2 men she'd met last night were not, technically speaking, his friends. Tom said nothing from the front seat. Jerry had approximately 4 things to say, and the self-preservation instincts to keep all of them to himself, which, for Jerry, was the emotional equivalent of running a marathon. The car pulled out. Across the street, in a grey sedan that had been parked there since 9 that morning, one of Lorenzo Calvetti's men lowered his coffee cup and picked up his phone. Lorenzo was on his first espresso when the call came in, one hand absently feeding the teacup poodle he'd bought for Ruby, currently sitting in his lap on a silk rope leash and behaving like it owned the building. "Ferraro walked out smiling," his man said. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. He set the espresso down slowly. "Smiling." He turned this over. "Good. The operation's running smoothly. Find out who owns that clinic, what they're moving, everything that goes in and out under that vet sign." He ended the call. The poodle bit down on his finger. Hard. Lorenzo looked at the dog for a long moment, his voice arriving at somewhere between calm and genuinely unsettling. "I paid more for you than most people's cars." He tilted his head. "And you're biting me?" The dog stared back with the conviction of an animal that had never once questioned its own judgment. Lorenzo picked up his espresso with his other hand and looked at the dog for a long moment. "Huh!" He tilted his head. "You're lucky you're decorative." Ruth Ferraro was in her usual chair beside the fireplace. Red lipstick, sharp blonde bob, Chanel suit the color of winter fog, with her green tea and her full attention on Jerry, who was sitting across from her on the edge of the settee with his hands clasped between his knees and his expression doing the thing it did when he had news he hadn't yet decided how to package. "Mrs. Ferraro." He shifted his weight. "So, the good news. Caesar's doing well. Ruth's gaze stayed on him over the rim of her cup. What did he swallow? Jerry's hands came apart. Slime. Ruth's brow came down slowly. Excuse me? Jerry lifted one shoulder. The stuff kids play with. He's a fan. Puts anything in his mouth, that dog. Real no-filter situation. The silence that followed had the texture of something expensive and very sharp. Brutus! Ruth turned her head toward the hallway. Come, boy! The standard poodle came at a full run. Continental clip immaculate, chest forward, ears airborne, and dropped himself at her feet with the focused composure of a soldier reporting in. Jerry leaned forward immediately, deploying a smile that had no business being that enthusiastic. Hey, Brutus, good to see you, buddy. Brutus ignored him. Brutus had always ignored him, with the serenity of an animal who had assessed the situation years ago and arrived at a conclusion he saw no reason to revisit. Ruth was already running 2 fingers along the poodle's topknot, her expression tightening as she found what she was looking for. One curl drifted a millimeter off its intended line. Her jaw set. I'm going to need to speak to the groomer. She smoothed it twice and straightened up, her spine not having moved an inch throughout. Jerry, is there anything else? Jerry's lips pressed together. His shoulders did a small, non-committal thing. Ruth looked at him with her pale blue eyes, the color of a February sky with no plans to improve, and the room rearranged itself around the weight of her attention. All of it, Jerry, every second of my son's day. Right, he exhaled. So, this may be nothing. His hands shifted in his lap. The vet, Jennifer Adams. Turns out Dominic knows her. From before. Old friend, sounds like. Ruth's chin lifted a fraction. Jennifer. She let the name sit. And Dominic. Was he interested? Did he seem taken with her? Jerry considered the question with the care of a man choosing his footing on ice. He wore cologne this morning. He held up 2 fingers. More than usual. How much more? Ruth's fingers stilled on the teacup. I could smell it from the back seat, Mrs. Ferraro. Jerry held her gaze, steady as a man delivering a verdict. Ruth picked up her tea, set it back down without drinking, and when he sees her, his expression. Smiles. Jerry pressed his mouth flat, as if this were news he was still processing himself. Every time he sees her. Outside, the grounds were still. Brutus rested his chin on her shoe, patient and warm. Ruth reached for her phone on the side table beside her. The address of that clinic, Jerry. Not far from the Ferraro estate. Close enough that the Crows could have managed it without much effort, assuming the Crows had standards about the neighborhoods they flew over. Ruby Calvetti was sitting cross-legged on the chair across from Lorenzo's desk, holding a teacup poodle at arm's length with the intense focus of a photographer who needed one more shot. Left, no, right, wait, look at me, look at me, look at... A tongue click. Gucci! Gucci stared into the middle distance. Gucci had been named in the car on the drive home, had accepted it immediately, and had spent the time since making it very clear she found the concept of eye contact beneath her. Lorenzo sat at his desk, a call wrapping up, his espresso cooling at his elbow. He set the phone down and found his niece tilting the dog toward the window light, searching for the right angle. Uncle Lorenzo! Ruby finally lowered Gucci and gave up, which everyone in the room understood to be temporary. I am so ready to get started. I've already told everyone I'm an executive. Lorenzo set his coffee down. Good, but they keep asking why I'm not going into an office. She tilted her head. What do I tell them? Lorenzo reached for his espresso with the patience of a man who had managed considerably worse. Tell them you work remotely. You don't answer to anyone. You're an executive. He took a sip. That's the whole point. Ruby opened her mouth, and then something shifted in her face. The Instagram energy dropped a level, briefly, into something that actually meant what it was saying. I want to do something real, Uncle, something that matters. I want to carry the Calvetti name and have it mean something. She held his gaze. I want to earn it. Lorenzo studied his niece with the quiet desperation of a man who had run out of better options. Ruby. A smile that reached every corner of his face and none of his eyes. You are the future of this family. He delivered it with the conviction of a man who had decided, at some earlier point, not to look too hard at that sentence. Which brings me to this. He set the cup down. You made a donation. $5 million. Animal Welfare Foundation. Ruby's eyes went wide. We're hosting a gala for it. He straightened a pen on his desk. Saturday night. The sound Ruby made was not quite a scream and not quite a gasp. It was the sound of someone whose brain had just presented them with a perfect content opportunity and a genuine emotional response simultaneously, and was now managing both. She pressed her hands to her face. That is incredible. Her teeth caught her lower lip, eyes going somewhere dreamy. This is going to look so good on my page. The hands came down. Wait, her brow furrowed. I don't have $5 million. Lorenzo drew a slow breath through his nose. I made the donation in your name. He watched her work through it. Oh, the frown dissolved. Okay, that works. Ruby. His voice dropped, the way it did when something actually mattered. Saturday night, your job is Dominic Ferraro. I want you with him. He raised his eyes to hers. Closely. Ruby listened with complete seriousness. Oh, I see. She nodded. You want me to make him feel welcome, keep him company, make sure he doesn't get bored? Absolutely. Lorenzo leaned back. In fact, make sure he has a wonderful time. Ruby rolled one shoulder, easy and certain. That's basically my whole thing, Uncle Lorenzo. You know I'm fun. Lorenzo looked at her for a moment, a smile that reached every corner of his face and none of his eyes. I do. He set the cup down and tapped something on his phone, then slid it across the desk. I sent you a clinic page on Instagram. The vet who'll be looking after Gucci. Go in, introduce yourself, get to know her, take Gucci regularly. Ruby pulled the phone toward her and opened the page. Adam's Animal Clinic. She scrolled. Her nose did a small thing. Uncle, this is in Brooklyn. I searched specifically for the best vet. He held her gaze and winked once. Only the best for Gucci. Ruby scrolled through the page, glanced at Gucci, then up at Lorenzo, with the sincere gratitude of someone who had no idea she was a piece on a board. You really are the best uncle. Lorenzo picked up his espresso and let the compliment land exactly where he'd intended it to. Of course I am. Across the bridge, Jen was sitting with her chin in her hands, watching Caesar watch her back from his recovery cage with the focused intensity of a dog who had things to say and was waiting for the right moment to say them, with no idea that her small Brooklyn clinic was about to become the most sought-after address in both New York's high society and its criminal underworld. Nick stood on the sidewalk and read the sign. Goodfellas Slice House. Red and white, cheerful font, letters doing their very best. He turned to Jerry. Jerry lifted both shoulders. It was the only place I could buy that fast. The owner needed cash. He spread his hands. The name was part of the deal. Nick turned back to the awning, back to Jerry. He said nothing, which with Nick covered a wide range of meanings, and went inside. Tom and Jerry followed. The place was small and warm and smelled like garlic and oregano. A genuine neighborhood spot, the kind that had a loyal lunch crowd and a handwritten specials board and absolutely no reason to exist as a front for anything. Behind the counter, 2 employees in Goodfellas aprons stood very still. The taller one, Mark, mid-20s, dark-eyed, had gone the color of someone whose body had just made a decision without consulting his brain. The shorter one, Troy, was studying Nick with an expression that had nothing to do with fear. Is that Dominic Ferraro? Mark said, low, through barely moving lips. Troy tilted his head. Who? My uncle worked for his family. Shipping, port logistics, some other things. Mark stopped. You just don't go near those people. Troy tilted his head, eyes moving unhurriedly up and then down. I don't know about any of that, but I wouldn't mind climbing those shoulders. Mark stared at him. Nick, meanwhile, had walked the length of the front room and pushed open the door to the back. The space was large. Exposed brick, storage shelving, a single bare bulb. He stood in the middle of it, hands in his pockets, turning slowly. Get this decorated. He came back through the door, and get bulletproof glass on the entrance. Tom spoke without turning his head. The back room needs a second exit. See to it. Jerry was already at the counter, planted in front of Mark and Troy. Gentlemen. His eyes moved to Troy, stayed 1 beat longer than necessary, then came back to center. The place runs exactly as it has been. Same hours, same menu, same everything. He let that settle. The new owner's name is Nick Brown. Troy's chin lifted. Isn't that Dominic fur? Mark's elbow found his ribs. Jerry reached into his jacket. The movement was unhurried, almost casual, and when his hand came out, the gun was just there, resting against the fabric, not raised, not pointed, simply present in the way that certain facts are simply present. "Nick Brown," Jerry said pleasantly. "Say it back to me." Mark and Troy exchanged a glance. Then, in unison, "Nick Brown." "Beautiful." Jerry straightened his jacket. "Back to your day, guys, exactly like before." In the car, heading back toward the office, Nick's phone was already in his hand. He typed the message before he'd fully thought through the wording, which was unusual for him. "Dinner tonight? I owe you one." He put the phone face down on the seat. Across town, Jen was at her desk eating a sandwich and going through the afternoon schedule when the notification came in. She read it again, set the sandwich down. She typed back, "7 work for you?" His call came before she'd put the phone down. "Still into seafood?" His voice on the phone was different from the clinic, lower, less careful. "I can get us into Lobster Club." Jen leaned back in her chair. "Actually?" She turned the pen in her hand. "What about your pizza place?" Nick's hand stilled on the seat. "My pizza place," he murmured. "You own it, right? I'd rather do that." She kept her voice easy. "I like pizza more than I like being impressed." In the back seat of the car, Nick's expression shifted in a way that Tom, glancing in the rearview mirror, filed away without comment. She was the same. 14 years and she was exactly the same. No performance, no positioning, just the direct, uncluttered version of what she actually wanted. 7 o'clock, Nick said. "I'll pick you up." He ended the call. Jerry turned in the passenger seat with the expression of a man who had a great deal to say and was watching the window to say it. "Jerry." Nick's eyes stayed on his phone. "Call the restaurant. Tell Mark and Troy we have a guest tonight. Everything needs to be right." He slid the phone into his jacket. "Good wine. Nothing flashy." Jerry turned back around. He opened his mouth. "Quiet wine," Nick said. Jerry closed it. Tom said nothing from the driver's seat, but his eyes in the rearview mirror moved once, a single, measured glance. And that was the equivalent for Tom of a full paragraph. The black dress was out. Jen held it up, considered it, and put it back. It was a perfectly good dress. A great dress, technically. But she was going to a pizza place owned by a man she'd last seen when she was 16, and showing up in a cocktail dress would say things about her current mental state that she preferred to keep private. Jeans, a soft white blouse, a little blush, a little lip gloss, hair down. She checked the mirror and smiled before she'd made a conscious decision to. The memory arrived without warning, the way they always did. The treehouse, the yellow string lights they'd strung along the rafters, the two of them shouting every word of "We Are Young" at the top of their lungs at 11 at night, while the whole street presumably tried to sleep. And then Nick's glasses. She'd sat on them, both lenses intact, frames bent beyond recovery, and he'd spent the next several hours squinting at everything, like a man trying to read the sun. He'd still tried to dance. He'd reached for her hand, missed, veered slightly left, and walked directly out the open window onto the roof, where he'd stayed for a mortifying moment before gravity made its opinion known. She bit her lip. "Oh, Nick." He'd been her first crush and her first kiss, and, if she was being honest with herself, which, standing in front of her mirror in Brooklyn on a Tuesday night, she apparently was, he'd been the standard she'd been running against ever since without fully admitting it. The doorbell rang, and she was downstairs before she'd finished the thought. He was in a dark leather jacket and jeans and a white t-shirt that was doing absolutely nothing to downplay the problem, and they both looked at each other and then down at themselves. Jeans, casual tops, completely unplanned. And Nick laughed first. "Still matching?" He shook his head. "Some things survive." Before she could answer, he leaned in and pressed a kiss to her cheek, unhurried and easy, as if they'd been doing this for years. When he pulled back, they were close enough that she could smell his cologne, and her brain, which had been running a mostly professional operation all week, briefly staged a small internal coup. His eyes found hers. He nodded toward the street, where a black Ferrari sat at the curb like it had always lived there. "Come on, let's go get some pizza." She watched him from the passenger side, sideways, the way she used to. His hands were easy on the wheel, and there was something in his expression. Not quite a smile, just settled, like being here was exactly where he'd intended to end up. And after a while, without taking his eyes off the road, I still feel 18 when I'm with you. I don't know what to do with that. Jen reached over without thinking and touched the scar at his temple, light and brief. God, it's still there? Every time I see it, I think of that night. His voice was low, certain. I don't mind the reminder. She pulled her hand back. Nick, you should have told me you basically saw double without those glasses. I would have held on to you. You did hold on to me. He glanced over. Right after I went out the window. She laughed. The real kind, fast and completely beyond her control. And he watched it happen with the expression of someone who had just confirmed something they already suspected. The car turned onto the block. Jen sat up. Oh, I know this street. She leaned toward the window as the sign came into view, red and white, cheerful. Goodfellas Slice House, in letters that had committed fully to the bit. Oh my God, I walked past this place. This is yours? Nick cleared his throat. Recent acquisition. Jen looked at the sign. At him. Back at the sign. The name is very committed. Nick pulled into the space in front without responding to that. Mark and Troy were stationed behind the counter when they walked in, backs straight, expressions arranged into what could generously be described as professional warmth. Good evening, Mr. Brown. Mark's face had the careful arrangement of a man who had been briefed. Troy's welcome was slightly different in origin, but no less committed. As Nick and Jen moved past them toward the table in back, both employees watched them go, and both expressions, in perfect unison, dropped into something their manager would not have recognized. They looked very motivated. Jen settled into her chair. Nick poured the wine himself without being asked. We're family here. Jen watched him over the rim of her glass. You always had a way of making people feel like family. She tilted her head. Even back then, the first time we met, I felt close to you almost immediately. Nick looked at her for a moment, the way you do when something still hasn't fully landed, even though it's been right in front of you. His head moved slowly, side to side. His voice was quiet, almost to himself. I still can't believe you're right here. The corner of his mouth moved. So, veterinary? He set the bottle down. Of all the things I imagined for you. Yeah, of all the things I imagined for you, she came back with an amused voice, one eyebrow up. Pizza and export business wasn't exactly the top of the list. Your test scores were insane. I genuinely thought you'd end up building rockets. A faint smile crossed his face. It's nice to know you remembered me better than I actually was. The warmth in the room shifted slightly. Jen's smile stayed, but something behind it went quiet. That morning, her fingers closed around the stem of her glass. Your house was just empty. I couldn't even find an address. Nothing. Her eyes dropped to the table, then came back up. The night before you'd kissed you. His voice was even. It was my first kiss. She set the glass down carefully. Mine too, actually. His eyes didn't move from hers. She held his gaze. He reached into his jacket and set his phone on the table, a photo already on the screen. The two of them in the treehouse, the yellow string lights above their heads, both of them caught mid-look, the world outside dark and small and very far away. Jen stared at it. Her throat tightened. You kept it. 14 years. He picked the phone back up and pocketed it. Never deleted it. She reached across the table and held out her hand, not to hold, but palm up, waiting. He recognized it immediately, one side of his mouth lifting, and he reached over and they ran through the handshake they'd invented at 14. Knock, slide, tap, lock, release, both of them grinning at the end of it like the idiots they apparently still were. The pizza arrived, pepperoni, double mushroom. You remembered. Nick refilled her glass without being asked. Some things you just don't forget. They stayed until the candles had burned low. The conversation moved easily, back through old memories, into things they'd never said. Occasionally, somewhere neither of them had planned to go. At some point, Jen said something that made him laugh, really laugh. and she stored the sound away before she could stop herself. Once, when she reached for her glass, she caught him watching her with an expression that was warm and unguarded and not quite finished. He was the one who looked away. Outside, in a car parked at the far end of the block, Tom was working through a large slice when Jerry lowered the binoculars. "This was actually a solid investment," Tom said. Jerry pressed his earpiece. "Don't eat anything more fatty." Tom looked at the slice in his hand. "I'm not on a diet, Jerry, and this is margarita, not that fatty." Jerry rolled his eyes and jabbed a finger in Tom's direction. "Fatty! Don't eat with your mouth open like that. You're messing with my head." Tom took another bite. At the other end of the block, a man in a dark coat raised his phone. "Boss, looks like another deal going down." "Now it's a pizza place. The vet's with him." Ferraro showed her something on his phone, then they shook on it. Lorenzo stood at his window with a glass of whiskey. The city spread out below him in its usual indifferent grid. "Of course he did." He swirled the glass once. Pizza shops, vet clinics, handshakes with doctors. He watched his own reflection in the dark glass. "You think you're being clever, Dominic? Taking over the market piece by piece where no one's looking." He took a slow sip. "But I am looking." He ended the call and stood there a moment longer, the glass warm in his hand. Jen and Nick were standing at her door, and neither of them had moved toward it yet. "You could come up," Jen offered. "Check on Caesar before you go. He'll lose his mind." Nick's hands were in his jacket pockets. "I'm picking him up in the morning. Better to let him rest." She nodded. He was still there, hands in his jacket pockets, the street quiet behind him. Nick's eyes were still on hers. 14 years? And we just picked up right where we left off." Jen tilted her head. "Where we left off?" He looked down, a slow pull at the corner of his mouth, and when his eyes came back up to hers, the sentence he hadn't finished yet was still in them. "We should do this more often." Her hands were in her cardigan pockets. "I'd like that." He leaned in for her cheek, and she turned at the same moment, and their noses met with a small, undignified collision that neither of them had planned for. They both pulled back. For a second, neither of them moved, caught somewhere between laughing and not. Then Jen pressed her lips together. "Good night, Nick." She got the door open and herself inside before her face could do anything further. The hallway was dark, and she was standing in it, not quite ready to move yet. "Nick Brown." She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the banister. Halfway up, she stopped. "Can we really just pick up from where we left off?" Cleo appeared at the top of the stairs, assessed the situation with complete accuracy, and walked away. Nick crossed back to the street until he reached the car parked just around the corner, half in shadow, which had absolutely zero business being there. He knocked on the window. Tom rolled it down. In his hand was a slice of pizza. Nick took in the pizza, then Tom, then the pizza again. "Didn't I tell you not to follow me?" 24/7, boss." Tom's voice carried no awareness of any conflict. Jerry leaned forward from the passenger seat. "You know we can't leave you alone out here, especially after the port contracts." He spread his hands. "The Calvettis don't forget things like that." "Jerry." Nick stepped back from the window. "Remember who you work for." He held Jerry's gaze for a moment. "And it's not my mother." Jerry's mouth closed. Nick walked back to the Ferrari. Jen's window was still lit. He stood looking up at it for a moment. Jen. The thought came before he could stop it. The version of this where he told her everything. Why he'd left Millbrook without a word. What he actually did. What it would mean for her to know. "What if I lose you again?" He got in. The door closed. And by the time it did, the expression was already gone, replaced by the one that ran operations, the one that didn't leave things unfinished. Dominic Ferraro, all the way back. The next morning, Jen was in the clinic with Caesar when the front door chimed. The woman who walked in had long red hair, a pink jeweled harness on the teacup poodle in her arms, and the energy of someone who had never once arrived anywhere quietly. All of this was manageable. What was less manageable was the dog, which was sparkling, in the literal, rhinestone-adjacent, throwing light in 4 directions sense of the word. "Hi, I heard you're the best vet in New York," she beamed. "I'm Ruby Calvetti, and This is Gucci, and she deserves only the best. Jen kept her expression professional. Since when did people from expensive zip codes start finding her? She crouched slightly, her voice shifting to the warm, unhurried tone she used for nervous animals and their more nervous owners. "Hi, Miss Calvetti." A beat softer. "Hi, Gucci." Ruby set Gucci on the exam table. The dog sneezed immediately and appeared personally offended by it. "Spring allergies," Ruby announced. "Like me, dogs take after their owners, right?" Jen leaned close to the fur. The answer arrived before she'd finished the question. She straightened up. "Miss Calvetti," she paused. "Did you spray perfume on her?" Ruby leaned in. "I tried a new fragrance." Jen lifted her one eyebrow. "For you or for the dog?" Ruby considered this with genuine seriousness. "Yes." Jen looked at her for a moment. Then she set the comb down. She worked through the coat next, fingers finding what she already suspected. Rhinestone effect glitter particles woven through the top coat, catching the light with complete indifference to the damage they were doing. "These are affecting her respiratory system." Jen set the brush down. "No perfume, no glitter." She looked up. "Ruby, Gucci needs a clean girl era." Ruby's fingers drifted up to one of her diamond earrings, the ones that had absolutely no business being on a tracksuit, but were there anyway, catching the light the way everything on Ruby caught the light. She was thinking about Gucci, probably. "Clean and healthy." Jen handed back the brush. "That's the whole look." Ruby nodded slowly, her fingers still on the earring. "Okay, clean girl. I can work with that." When the exam was done, Jen straightened up. "Don't worry, by tomorrow the sneezing will be gone, eyes will be clear." She looked at Ruby directly. "But no perfume, no glitter. We have a deal?" Ruby smiled. "Deal." Then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Jen, fully and without warning. Jen's hands came up slowly. She patted Ruby's shoulder once, eyebrows somewhere near her hairline. Ruby pulled back, still beaming. "Oh, I really liked you. You know what? I just donated $5 million to an animal welfare foundation." She said it the way someone else might mention they'd tried a new coffee place. "I love animals. I also have 2 parakeets. Jelena," she winked. "Get it? I'll bring them sometime." Jen opened her mouth, closed it. "Actually," Ruby was already reaching for her phone. "We're hosting a gala for the foundation next week. You should come." Jen's hand came up, a small wave that meant not really my scene. "That kind of thing isn't really. I'm insisting." Ruby's shoulder lifted, easy and certain. "I'll introduce you to everyone. Good for your practice, good for you." She tilted her head. "You're a vet. You absolutely have to be there. And honestly," she glanced around the clinic with the benevolent curiosity of someone already mentally redecorating, "my friends could probably help you move somewhere with a better zip code." Jen's chin lifted slightly. "I actually like it here." Ruby smiled the way people smile when they're going to circle back to something. "We'll talk." Jen looked at her. There was genuinely no counter-argument available. "Sure," she said. "Why not?" "Amazing." Ruby blew a kiss, tucked Gucci under her arm, and walked out the door exactly the way she'd come in, like the room had been arranged specifically for her exit. Jen was still standing in the middle of the clinic, looking at the door. "What?" Jen looked at the door. "Was that?" Caesar looked up from the floor with the resigned expression of a dog who had also witnessed the whole thing and had no answers. The Ferraro estate on a Sunday morning was its own kind of quiet, the kind that had been deliberately purchased and carefully maintained. Ruth was already in her chair when Nick arrived, Brutus at her feet, the coffee service laid out with the precision of a woman who had never once done anything carelessly in her life. She was watching her son cross the room the way she always did, with an admiration she kept entirely to herself, because saying it out loud would have given him an advantage. Nick sat across from her and picked up his coffee. "Don't worry. Everything's under control." "I never worry about you." Ruth set her cup down with a soft click. "I worry about 2 things. She folded her hands in her lap. "Women who want what comes with you. And Lorenzo Calvetti." Her voice stayed even. You pulled the port contracts from under him. A man like that doesn't let it go. I told you it's handled, Mom. I know you did. She picked up her cup again. Are you seeing anyone? What happened to that model? Abby, was it? The blonde. Nick set his cup down with the patience that came from years of practice. No one serious. Ruth turned her cup slowly. Where were you last night? Nick set his coffee on the side table. Jerry already told you, so why are you asking? Ruth unfolded her hands, then folded them again. Oh, sweetheart. Her voice was gentle, certain. I'm a mother. I know women. They love money and power. She was looking at him now with open admiration. But you have all three: money, power, and charm. She smiled. Perfect combination. And you don't want to lose me to someone you can't get along with. Nick leaned back. Your intentions are very clear, Mom. The girl from last night. Ruth's voice was easy, light, which, with Ruth, was always the tell. The pizza place. She let that breathe for a second. Just a friend? Nick reached for his jacket and stood. Someone from Millbrook. He was already moving, and he kept his voice level, saying only what he'd decided to. The neighbor. Jennifer. Ruth's chin came up. Jennifer? She was quiet for a moment. The one with the braces? I have to go. He leaned down and kissed her cheek quickly. We'll talk. We were just getting started. But he was already crossing the room, and then the door closed, and Ruth Ferraro was sitting alone with Brutus at her feet, and her coffee going cold, and the name Jennifer hanging in the air where her son had been standing. She was still looking at the door. Then slowly she smoothed her jacket and crossed her arms. Jennifer. All these years. And now back in New York, apparently, with a clinic in Brooklyn, and her son turning up there with cologne on. Brutus was watching her with the diplomatic neutrality he always maintained when she was thinking something through. She straightened the coffee service, one small, precise adjustment, and reached for her phone. I think it's time I paid Brooklyn a visit. Nick walked in wearing a suit, and whatever cologne he had on arrived before he did. Jen was behind the counter with Cleo in her lap when the door opened, and her face did the thing it kept doing lately, lit up fast without asking her first. Morning? He was already smiling as he crossed the room. That easy, unhurried smile that seemed to have been there before he'd even decided to come in. Hey, Nick, she scratched Cleo's ears. Came to pick up the big guy. We'd gotten kind of used to having him around. He was still crossing the room when he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her cheek. Easy, as if this were simply a thing they did now, as if the question of whether it was a thing they did had already been settled somewhere without her being formally notified. God. She had absolutely no complaints. What she did have was Cleo, who chose that exact moment to voice a sharp, unambiguous opinion and drag one white paw across Nick's forearm with the decisive energy of someone setting a boundary. Cleo, Jen caught her. Easy. Nick straightened, one eyebrow up. Possessive. She has strong feelings about personal space. Jen kept her expression entirely professional. From the back, Caesar had heard the voice. He was barking before Jen had even moved. She opened the cage door, and he launched himself forward, and Nick caught him easily, like muscle memory. Jen was already grinning. They were facing each other over Caesar's enormous, delighted head, and Nick was shaking his head slowly, and there was a moment there that neither of them rushed. What? She asked. Nothing. He was still smiling. He shifted Caesar in his arms and was already turning toward the door. And then he stopped, Caesar still tucked against his side, not looking at her yet. Maybe I'll call you tomorrow. He turned his head. We could do something. Jen straightened a pen on the counter that didn't need straightening. You could come here. Watch a movie, low-key. He paused. Something moved across his face. Almost surprised, like he hadn't quite expected that. The simplicity of it, the complete absence of performance. Are you serious? Completely. She tilted her head. Why? No reason. He was moving again toward her this time. Okay. Okay. Her chin came up. Oh. And the ID? He nodded. and then he was crossing toward her. And by the time he stopped, she was looking up at him, and the distance between them was not the distance of people talking about paperwork. She was still wearing the smile when he leaned in and touched his lips to hers. Barely, so briefly it was almost theoretical, a question that didn't wait for an answer. He pulled back. Jen stood exactly where she was, not entirely sure her lungs were working. "What was that?" Her voice was barely above a breath. His voice was even, pleasant. "A sign that we're picking up from where we left off." He took a few steps back, turned, and walked out with Caesar at his side. The door swung shut, and Jen was standing in the middle of her clinic, with her fingers pressed to her lips and the faint, impossible warmth of it still there. Oh, Nick Brown, right where we left off. She dropped her hand, frowned at the door. "Does this man not own an ID?" She crossed to her desk, sat down and typed Nick Brown into the search bar. 11 million results stared back at her. Jen leaned back in her chair and stayed there, looking at all those Nick Browns who weren't her Nick Brown. Lorenzo Calvetti's building had 28 floors. His office was on the 27th, which was exactly where he liked it. One floor below the top, because a man who needed to be at the very top was a man who still had something to prove. He stepped off the elevator that morning, already reviewing his schedule, and stopped. Through the glass wall of the office beside his own, Ruby was sitting behind the executive manager's desk. Gucci was on the floor, tail going. The nameplate on the door read, Executive Manager. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. "Ruby," a beat of silence that was doing a lot of work. "Why are you in Maggie's office?" Ruby looked up with the composed, professional expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She lifted Gucci from the floor and settled him in her lap. "Uncle Lorenzo," a small, gracious gesture toward his office. "Go to your office. I'll be with you shortly. I have a report." Lorenzo went to his office. He wasn't entirely sure how that had happened. Ruby appeared a moment later, Gucci under one arm, a neat folder under the other, and set the folder on his desk with the quiet confidence of someone presenting to a board. "I told you I'd make you proud." She nodded toward the folder. "Open it." Lorenzo opened it. Inside were printed Instagram screenshots, each one annotated in Ruby's handwriting, circles, arrows, small neat notes in the margins. He turned one over, then another. Then he looked up at her. "What is all this?" "Dominic Ferraro joined Instagram in 2017, Ruby began, settling into the chair across from him with Gucci in her lap. "His handle is at DeFerraro. No nickname, no warmth, no risk." She tilted her head. "Controlled, careful, the kind of man who doesn't give anything away unless he's decided to." Lorenzo looked at the screenshots. He was listening. "First post, a gym class. He cares about how he looks, how he presents himself." She turned a page for him. "First year, 12 photos, 3 of them selfies. We'll give him that. He was young. After that, 7 or 8 a year, always a suit. Events, golf club openings, a photo with the mayor." She paused. "Never a single photo with a woman." She reached over and tapped one of the prints. "But look at this one. Official event, half a smile, and then this one." She slid another photo forward. "That smile is real. The first one is social. The second one is chemical." She turned another page. "Also, he has never used a vacation photo as a profile picture. That indicates discipline, vanity, or unresolved grief." A brief pause. "Possibly seasonal." Lorenzo leaned forward. Ruby turned another page. "I also spoke with 3 of his former girlfriends." Lorenzo put the folder down. All 3 confirmed the same pattern. Excellent manners, limited emotional availability, 0 overnight retention. She crossed one leg over the other. "Longest relationship? 3 months. He always has a book on his nightstand, and he's allergic to wool. Can't touch it. Won't touch anyone wearing it." She paused. "One of them thought he was rejecting her personally. He was rejecting the sweater." She let that sit. "Primary emotional bond, says," she tapped the last page. "The German Shepherd. Caesar. That's where he's soft." Lorenzo was sitting with his mouth slightly open. This was not an expression that crossed his face often. "What about his business connections?" he asked. "His operations?" Ruby waved a hand. "That's not my area, Uncle. That side of things is overtime." She stood, smoothing her jacket, wearing the expression of someone who had clearly earned something. "So," she tilted her head, "did I get a promotion?" Lorenzo looked at his niece, then at the folder, then back at her. "I'm making you—" He paused, buying time from his own surprise. "Deputy CEO." Ruby's hands came together in a single sharp clap. She stepped forward and wrapped both arms around his neck. "Oh, thank you, Uncle Lorenzo." Lorenzo patted her arm, once, carefully, like a man who was still catching up with events. "Of course, sweetheart." Ruby pulled back, beaming. Her eyes went, briefly, to his chair. "At this rate, I'll be sitting in your chair soon. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Lorenzo reached for a pen on his desk and moved it approximately 1 centimeter to the left, which was his version of regaining control. Ruby lifted Gucci with the unbothered ease of someone who had already moved on. Her voice was gracious, unhurried, the tone of someone doing you a favor by accepting. "Okay, Deputy CEO is fine for now." She was already heading for the door. "You'll see my real work at the Gala. I'm going to build the most professional relationship with Dominic Ferraro you've ever witnessed." Lorenzo laced his fingers together. "Professional is good." He watched her, then slowly spread his hands open, fingers apart, and rocked them once, left, right. But not too professional. Ruby stopped at the door. She turned back with the expression of someone taking a very serious note. "You want the amateur enthusiasm?" "Absolutely." Lorenzo's hands came apart, spread wide. Ruby considered this for exactly 1 second. "Done." She tucked Gucci under her arm, straightened her jacket with one hand, and walked out the way people walk out when they've already decided the meeting went well. Lorenzo sat with the folder in front of him, the annotated photos, the neat handwriting, the name Caesar underlined twice. Underlined, not circled, which suggested she'd gone back to it. He closed the folder. He had, he realized, underestimated her completely. Jen pulled the door open. Nick was standing there in a grey sweatshirt and jeans, hands in his pockets, and she was wearing a grey sweatshirt and jeans, and the universe, apparently, had opinions. His eyes dropped to her sweatshirt, came back up to her face, and the corner of his mouth was already moving. "Don't." She was already laughing. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to her cheek. Something he had apparently decided was simply what they did now. But this time, he stayed a breath longer than usual, his face close to hers, the warmth of him carrying that cologne she had already made the mistake of associating with him specifically. Jen's heart did something she was choosing not to formally acknowledge. "Come in." She stepped back. Cleo was in her usual corner, watching Nick with the unblinking focus of a border official who had not yet decided whether to let him through. Across the street, in a car that had absolutely no reason to be there, Jerry had the binoculars pressed to his face. His whole vibe changed. Sweatshirt, jeans, hands in his pockets. He shook his head slowly. "I can't call him boss right now. I physically cannot. I want to go over there and slap him on the back of the neck and say, 'Hey, Nick, what's up?'" Tom was working through a donut with the focused patience of a man who had opinions about very few things. "You're very into appearances, Jerry." "I'm observant." Jerry didn't lower the binoculars. Jen was already talking as they climbed the stairs. "I was trying to figure out what to cook you, and then I thought, chicken pot pie." They both said it at the same time. "Cream sauce!" Nick stopped on the second step. She turned and they were eye level, which was unusual and slightly alarming, and he was smiling at her with a warmth that had nowhere to hide at this distance. "You remembered." His voice dropped slightly, and she chose not to think too hard about why that affected her. Jen laughed and lifted one shoulder. "Of course I remembered." The apartment was small, and she had cleaned it so thoroughly that morning that even the corners had corners. But she was not going to tell him that. "It's cozy." He was looking around, and he meant it. She could tell he meant it, which was worse than if he'd been polite. He was taking in the bookshelves and the mismatched chairs, and the little kitchen that smelled like pastry and butter and brown sugar. "This is what home feels like." He turned to her. "I've missed this." "Your place is probably very impressive." "It's impressive." He set his jacket on the chair she'd left clear for exactly this reason. "But impressive and this," he gestured at the room, "are not the same thing. Come see it sometime, but don't expect it to feel like this." They ate at the little table by the window. Outside, Brooklyn was being entirely itself. A siren somewhere, someone's music bleeding up through the floor, the city going about its business with complete indifference to what was happening at their window. Nick took a bite. His eyes closed. He stayed like that for a moment, eyes closed, fork midway to the plate, like a man in the middle of a very private realization. Oh my God, this is better than I remembered. I left out the celery. Jen refilled his glass. You're allergic. Remember 2010? Nick opened his eyes. The emergency room. Your mother arrived and told mine that she had no business feeding you without a full medical disclosure. Jen raised an eyebrow. She was this close to a lawsuit. Nick laughed, real, unguarded, and Jen filed it away somewhere before she'd decided to. I completely forgot. God. He shook his head. I'm sorry about her. I was terrified of her. She picked up her glass. For good reason. Most people are. He turned his glass in his hand. She means well. In her way. She loves you. Jen kept her voice neutral. Nick's mouth curved. Aggressively, he set his fork down. Yes. I have to admit, she's obsessed with me. Later, Nick was talking about the early years in New York. Arriving at 18, a company to run, no map for any of it. And Jen was listening, she was, but she was also cataloguing things she had no business cataloguing. The slight dimple on his right cheek, his hand moving through his hair when he was searching for a word, his voice dropping when he was saying something he actually meant. 14 years, she thought, and it's still there. How is it still there? He stopped mid-sentence. He was watching her. The room was warm and close. Jen was on her feet before she'd made a conscious decision to be. Dessert. She said it a little too quickly, already moving toward the kitchen. We need dessert. Jen pulled the apple crumble out of the oven and set it on the counter, and Nick straightened up from where he'd been leaning against the doorframe. Oh no. He took a step closer. Is that apple crumble? I love it. Jen turned around with the oven mitts still on her hands. It absolutely is. Nick lifted his eyebrow. Vanilla ice cream. Do I look like someone who would make apple crumble without vanilla ice cream? She was already reaching for the freezer. Apple crumble without vanilla ice cream is like a Christmas tree with no lights. It still exists. But why? They both laughed hard. Nick was standing right beside her now, close enough that their arms were touching, and Jen was scooping ice cream with the careful concentration of someone diffusing something. The ice cream scoop slipped. A cold ribbon of vanilla landed on her forearm. Her eyes dropped to her forearm. His did too. Nick reached over. His fingers lifted her arm gently and he brought it toward him. And for a moment he just held it there, her arm in his hands, close enough that when he exhaled she could feel it against her skin. Neither of them moved. The ice cream was melting and nobody was doing anything about it. Then his eyes dropped to her forearm, and he ran his tongue slowly along the inside of it, deliberate, unhurried all the way. Waste not. He barely whispered it, his eyes not leaving hers. Jen's lips parted, her pulse was somewhere in her throat. The ice cream scoop was still in her hand, and she had completely forgotten what it was for. Nick leaned in and drew her toward him and pressed a soft kiss to her lips. Barely there, unhurried, like a question. Jen's heart was doing something loud and inconvenient. His eyes were very green at this distance. Then he pulled her closer, and this time it was different, certain, decided, and the serving spoon hit the counter and neither of them noticed. She wasn't entirely sure how they ended up on the sofa. One moment the kitchen, the next his hands were in her hair and she was in his lap, and he was kissing her jaw, her neck, the soft place below her ear, his mouth warm and deliberate, like he had nowhere else to be. His hands moved to her waist, her hips, pulling her closer, and she could feel him through the fabric, and she was very, very certain that the next 20 minutes were going to be the best decision she'd made in years. His hands slid under the hem of her sweatshirt, warm against her skin, and Jen caught her breath and pulled back, just slightly, just enough, and he stopped. Immediately, completely. His hands stilled where they were, and he waited, watching her face with an attention that felt more intimate than everything that had just happened. He whispered to her lips. Did I do something wrong? No. Her voice was uneven in a way she couldn't help. "We just—" She laughed a little, embarrassed in a way that felt oddly comfortable, like being embarrassed in front of someone who already knew everything about her. "That was really good, but I think I need to—" "Hey." His hand moved to her hair, slowly smoothing it back from her face. "I got carried away. I'm sorry." His thumb traced her cheek, gentle. "We go at your pace. We can just watch the movie." For a moment, neither of them moved. Her hand was against his chest without her quite knowing when it had gotten there. His heartbeat was fast under her palm. He was flushed and completely serious about this. No edge, no frustration, just this. And that was worse than everything else. "Okay," she exhaled. Her hand moved to his face and stayed there for a moment. "Thank you." He covered her hand with his. Then she climbed off his lap slowly. Cleo appeared from nowhere, stepped between them with the calm authority of a building superintendent, and sat down. Then came the growl, low, pointed, and entirely directed at Nick. Nick looked down at her. "Did I miss a background check?" Jen folded her arms. "You failed it." Nick nodded once, like he accepted the ruling. Then Cleo, apparently satisfied that order had been restored, turned in a tight circle and settled at Jen's hip. Jen picked up the remote. Nick watched her settle back into the cushions, tuck her feet under her, pointed at the screen. Entirely at home. A small smile moved across his mouth without him deciding to. He hadn't felt this in a long time, maybe not since the last time he'd been in a room with her. They watched the movie The Perks of Being a Wallflower, with their feet tucked under them and the apple crumble between them, mostly eaten. They'd seen it at least 5 times together the summer of 2012, and neither of them mentioned this. At some point he reached over and took her hand, and she let him, and neither of them commented on that either. That tunnel scene. Jen glanced at him. That was always your favorite. Still is. He didn't look away from the screen. Jen tilted her head toward him. Why? Nick kept his eyes on the screen. Because, for a few seconds, they looked completely free. Jen turned toward him. That's it. The corner of his mouth moved. That seemed like a lot at 17. Everything seemed like a lot at 17. She leaned her head back against the cushion. He turned toward her and she met his eyes, and then he squeezed her hand once and faced the screen again. When she glanced over, he was asleep. Head slightly back, completely gone, with the defenselessness of someone who has fallen asleep somewhere. They feel safe. She sat watching him. This man, she thought, and stopped herself before she finished the sentence. She got up carefully and found the spare blanket, the cotton one, the soft one, not the wool one, and pressed her lips together as she spread it over him. Then she settled back into the other end of the sofa and pulled the wool one over herself, and sat there with the city going on outside and him asleep beside her. In the relationship since Millbrook, she'd never found this. Not his warmth, not the laughing at the same things, not the understanding that passed between them without either of them having to say it. Maybe it was unreasonable to look for all of that in one person. Maybe she'd been asking too much. But then, what if you actually found it? What if you'd had it once, and then you'd seen it again, and now you couldn't imagine letting it go? She watched him sleep and didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure she needed one yet. Nick was still asleep on the sofa when Jen woke. Morning had only just started to happen. The pale kind of early light that made Brooklyn look briefly undecided about itself. Nick was out cold under the cotton blanket, one arm across his stomach, breathing deep and even. In sleep, all the sharpness went out of him. He looked younger like this, softer, closer for a second, to the boy she remembered. Jen stood there for a second, then she picked up her keys and slipped out. The bakery was half a block down. She was rounding the corner when she nearly walked into Caesar. Caesar was large, was on a leash, and was in the process of conducting urgent business against a lamppost with the focused dignity of a dog who had been waiting some time for this opportunity. At the other end of the leash was Jerry, in yesterday's jacket, with the look of a man who had been awake for a very long time and had made peace with it. Jen stopped. Jerry's head came up. His face cycled through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, calculation, the decision to commit to surprise, and landed on Delight. "Miss Adams," he spread one hand. "Well, this is a lovely coincidence." Jen looked at him, then at Caesar. "Is it?" Her eyebrows lifted. "You don't look like you've slept, Jerry." "I'm a morning person." He said it with complete conviction. "Early riser, fresh air, dog walking." He gestured vaguely at Caesar. "You know how it is." "In this neighborhood?" She glanced up and down the empty street. "Nick's a very close friend. Our boss, Nick." Jerry cleared his throat. "He mentioned he might be nearby, and I thought, well, Caesar needed a walk, so I said, I'll just come pick him up." Caesar, having concluded his business, padded over to Jen and pressed his enormous head against her legs with the easy affection of a dog who held no grudges. Jen reached down and scratched behind his ears, still looking at Jerry. "Jerry?" She crossed her arms. "Miss Adams." He adjusted the leash with the focus of someone who needed something to do with his hands. "There's a car across the street, Jerry. I can see Tom from here." She nodded toward it. Jerry turned toward the car. The car, a black sedan parked at an angle that suggested permanence, had Tom visible in the passenger window. Tom, registering that he had been spotted, gave a small, composed wave. Jen's expression went through its own journey. She straightened up slowly, tilting her head at the two of them, the car, the dog, the general situation. "The three of you." She tilted her head. "Very close friends, huh?" Jerry pressed a hand to his chest. "The closest." She narrowed her eyes. "Did Nick tell you he was spending the night?" Jerry's chin came up with the confidence of a man delivering very good news. "Absolutely," Nick said. "Come pick me up in the morning." Jerry spread his hands. "So here we are." Come pick me up in the morning, which meant he'd known, had expected to stay, had built morning into the night before she'd even opened the door. She stood there with Caesar's head still warm against her leg and thought about that for a moment. The version of last night where the ending had already been decided before it began. She came back from the bakery with a paper bag and that same feeling still in her chest. Tom and Jerry were still leaning against the car, Caesar between them, all three working very hard at looking like they weren't waiting for anything. Jen stood in front of them with the big paper bag in her arms, looking at Tom, then Jerry, then Caesar, who had no opinion on the matter because Caesar was a golden soul who assumed all situations were fundamentally fine. "Come on up." She turned toward the door. "I got enough for everyone." Tom's eyes went to the bag. "What did you get?" Jen held it up. "Cinnamon rolls and croissants." Jerry looked at the bag, then at Tom, then back at the bag. The calculation on his face lasted about half a second. "I mean, we don't want to impose—" "You're standing on my sidewalk with a dog at 7:45 in the morning." Jen turned toward the door. "Come on." Jerry, falling into step behind her, leaned toward Tom like a man who had been rehearsing this part. "Nick is going to be so happy when he sees us." Tom said nothing. He rarely did when Jerry was this confident about something. Nick was standing when Jen walked in, blanket still half around his shoulders, hair doing something unrepeatable, squinting at the room like someone still working out where they were and why. He was already crossing toward her, mouth open, something forming, when Caesar hit him at full speed. 90 pounds of German Shepherd made contact with his chest with the enthusiasm of a dog who had been outside for several hours and had developed strong opinions about this. Nick absorbed the impact without moving, which said something about him, and then, over Caesar's shoulder, he saw Jerry, and behind Jerry, Tom. His expression moved through several phases. Confusion, then the particular flatness of a man deciding how to play something, then the warm, easy smile he produced for Jen, who was watching all of this from the doorway with her arms folded and her eyebrows doing a great deal of communicating. "Hey!" Nick's voice came out easy, pleasant. The voice he used when he needed a moment to decide what the voice was going to say. "What are you guys doing here?" Jen looked at all three of them for a beat, her mouth curving just enough to be dangerous. Then she turned toward the counter and reached for the plates. "Well," she nodded once, "this is clearly a package deal." The moment her back was to them, Nick turned to find Jerry with a look that could have stripped paint. Jerry very carefully mouthed, "We got caught." Jen turned back around, still smiling. "So," She tilted her head. "You made mourning arrangements, Nick." Nick opened his mouth. "Your friends seem to have had instructions." She said it pleasantly, like she was commenting on the weather. "My car's right outside." Nick's voice came out a little faster than he'd planned, one hand going toward the window. "Why would I call them to come get me?" He turned to Jerry, his voice dropping half a register. "He misunderstood. Right, Jerry?" Jerry nodded with the conviction of a man who had fully committed to this story. "Completely. My fault." Tom said nothing. He was examining the ceiling with sudden interest. Jen was already back at the counter, setting out cups. They ended up around the small table, which had not been designed for this and was doing its best. The cinnamon rolls were in the center. Tom had located one immediately and was working through it with the focused appreciation of a man who had been awake since before dawn and had earned this. Jerry was holding his coffee with both hands and staring at the middle distance. Nick was watching Jen and probably thought he was being subtle about it. In the far corner of the room, Cleo and Caesar sat facing each other with the focused stillness of two diplomats who had agreed not to escalate unless absolutely necessary. "So," Jen reached for her croissant, "how long have you three known each other?" Nick and Jerry exchanged a glance, both making the face of people consulting a shared memory. Jerry tilted his head. "God, how long has it been?" Nick was already nodding. "Years. Long time." They looked at each other. "Long time," they agreed. Tom looked up from his cinnamon roll. 20 years. The table went quiet. All three of them turned to Tom. Tom appeared to realize, somewhere in the process of chewing, that he had said a number out loud. His eyes moved to Nick. Nick cleared his throat. "Tom worked with my father. When I took over the business, Tom and Jerry came with the—" He paused. "The transition." Jen nodded slowly. Her eyes moved from Tom to Jerry to Nick and back again, doing the arithmetic she was very good at. Then she turned to Jerry. "Why do you carry a gun?" Jerry's mouth went through a brief but eventful journey before settling on open. "That's... Miss Adams, that's not exactly—" He straightened. "It's electric, actually, designed to look like a 9mm, but it's just—" Jerry got robbed. Nick set his coffee down. "Few years ago. He's been carrying it for protection." Jen set down her croissant. "Robbed of what?" "His dignity." Nick picked up his cup. "It was a whole thing." Jerry's mouth opened. Nick said his name once, quietly, without looking at him. Jerry's mouth closed. Tom finished his cinnamon roll and reached very calmly for another one. Nick was on his feet before the last cup was cleared. "We should go. You've got the clinic to open." Tom and Jerry were up in the same breath, as if they had been waiting for the signal, which they had. "Of course. Absolutely. Very busy." Jerry was already reaching for his jacket. Tom had his coat on before Jerry finished the sentence. They were at the door in seconds. Jen walked them to the door. When she turned back, Nick was still in the room. He was standing close now, one hand light on her arm, deliberate enough that she felt it everywhere. "I had a really good time tonight, Jen." His voice had dropped back into the register it used when it wasn't performing anything. "I can't remember the last time something felt that easy." He gave a small shake of his head, almost to himself. "Or that good." Jen tilted her head, looking at him. "Nick." He waited. So did she. "I just—" She looked down once, then back up. "I don't want to rush this and ruin it." Her voice stayed quiet. "Not with you." Something in his face softened. He nodded once. "I know." She held his gaze. "You do?" "Yeah." His thumb moved once against her arm. "Because I've been thinking the same thing." The tension left her shoulders in a slow, quiet line. "Good." He stepped closer, and she was aware of it the way she'd been aware of him all morning. The way she was always aware of him, which was the problem, and also not the problem at all. "But I really like you." His voice was low, direct. "And I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She wasn't going to smile. She had decided not to smile. And then she smiled. His eyes dropped to her mouth for the briefest second. Then he leaned in and pressed a small, unhurried kiss just at the corner of her lips. Soft enough to feel almost polite, intimate enough that it absolutely wasn't. When he pulled back, she was still looking at him. He picked up his jacket from the chair, unhurried now, already moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "I'll call you." She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall, trying for composure and not entirely making it. "Okay." He held her gaze for one extra second, the kind that said more than the words did. And then the door closed behind him. Nick didn't call the next day. Jen noticed. She just made a point of behaving like she hadn't. After all, she was the one who had said they should take it slow. She was the one who had stood there in her apartment, all calm eyes and steady voice, and drawn the line exactly where it needed to be drawn. So if Nick Brown failed to call the very next day, that did not qualify as a crisis. It qualified as consistency, possibly even maturity. That was what she told herself. Now, 1 hour before the Animal Welfare Foundation Gala on Saturday night, Jen was standing in front of her mirror in a black cocktail dress she'd bought months ago for no clear reason and never actually expected to wear. The dress was simple, black, and doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Which was the problem? She stood there looking at herself, having a small, private argument. She didn't go to night events. She went downstairs to the clinic. She went to the grocery store. She went occasionally to a bar with Claire where they split a bottle of wine and complained about things in a productive way. That was her social life, and it had been working fine for 3 years, and there was no good reason to show up at a black-tie animal welfare event at the Astor Crown on a Saturday night just because a very sparkly patient had handed her an invitation. 1 hour, she told herself. I'll stay just 1 hour and leave. She picked up her bag and went. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse, with a mirror situation far more ambitious than Jen's, Nick was having almost exactly the same conversation with himself. The difference was that his had started 3 days earlier, when Ruth had called to remind him about the gala, then called again to make sure he'd heard her, then sent Jerry upstairs with a printed invitation and a note that said simply, "Be there." 1 hour, Nick told the mirror, in and out. The mirror, having no death wish, offered no opinion. The Astor Crown's ballroom was already full when he walked in. Full in the way that meant everyone had arrived on time, because everyone wanted to be seen arriving on time. Crystal chandeliers, a string quartet working through something tasteful in the corner, and a crowd that wore their money carefully and their connections loudly. Ruth materialized from the left with the timing of someone who had been watching the door. Black Chanel, champagne in hand, the expression of a woman who had already assessed the room, found it acceptable, and was now turning her attention to more important matters. "Dominic." She kissed his cheek, then smiled. "You came alone?" Nick accepted a glass from a passing tray. "Hello, Mother." Her eyes moved over his shoulder. "I'm just saying, sweetheart, a man in your position, these occasions. It makes an impression, one way or another." "Every time." His voice was flat. "Every single time, Ruth." She smiled the smile of a woman who had absolutely no intention of stopping. Nick glanced around the room, taking inventory. "Why didn't you tell me the Calvettis were behind this evening?" His voice dropped. "Lorenzo's been trying to cut us out of the ports for years." Ruth's posture did not shift by a single degree. "This is how the world works, sweetheart." She raised her champagne. "You should know that by now. Smile to his face, dig the hole behind his back." Lorenzo Calvetti appeared moments later with the timing of someone who had also been watching the door. He came in wearing a deep burgundy suit that announced itself before he did, moving through the crowd with the ease of a man on his own territory, which tonight he was. He opened his arms as he approached, as if they were old friends, separated by bad timing rather than rivals separated by years of active professional sabotage. Warmly, Lorenzo took Ruth's hand and lifted it to his lips. Ruth, still the most elegant woman in any room. Ruth's eyes moved over the burgundy suit for exactly 1 second, the kind of second that contains a complete opinion. Smoothly, "Lorenzo, you've made quite an effort." Lorenzo turned to Nick. Something quick and calculating moved behind his eyes, then disappeared. Lower, casual on purpose. "Dominic, it's been a while since these events." He leaned in slightly. Working nights these days? Nick's smile arrived right on time, warm, polished, and empty. I prefer to keep a low profile, Lorenzo. He lifted his glass. Unlike some people. A beat. Business has been demanding, days and nights both. Lorenzo received that with the slow, private satisfaction of a man who had just confirmed something he already suspected. His chin lifted, his shoulders eased. Somewhere behind his eyes, a file closed. Ruby arrived like weather, felt before seen. Champagne-colored dress, red hair, green eyes, and the composed ease of someone who knew exactly what she looked like walking into a room and had spent some time making peace with the responsibility of it. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence. People didn't step aside exactly, but somehow there was space. Lorenzo's chest lifted. Proudly, letting the room listen. My niece. Ruby Calvetti. He let that land for a moment. Deputy CEO of Calvetti Group. She personally donated $5 million to tonight's foundation. Ruby's expression shifted at once to pained sincerity. One hand rose lightly to her chest. "Oh, Uncle Lorenzo, please!" Her voice lowered with graceful pain. "I never want recognition for giving. It embarrasses me deeply." Ruth's eyebrow moved. Barely. The way it did when something surprised her against her better judgment. "Ruby, darling." Ruth extended her hand warmly. "You've grown into quite a remarkable young woman." "Mrs. Ferraro?" Ruby's handshake was warm, her smile warmer, her eye contact exactly calibrated. "You're as striking as ever. I've always admired you." Ruth, who was rarely outmaneuvered in an opening exchange, held Ruby's gaze for one extra second with what might have been assessment. Then she pressed her elbow lightly into Nick's side. Nick extended his hand toward Ruby. Ruby turned her head sharply to the left with the focused urgency of someone who had just heard their name called from across a crowded room. "Oh, so sorry. One moment." She took a half-step back, entirely occupied with whatever had apparently demanded her immediate attention, which was nothing, because nothing had happened. Nick's hand stayed where it was, extended, unshaken, making its own small argument to the air. And then he let it drop. Lorenzo, still beside them, stood very still. His expression did something private and complicated. This girl, he thought, has been underestimated by everyone in this room, including me. He turned to Ruth with the pride of a man presenting evidence. "I'm very proud of her. Intelligent. Modest." He turned his glass in his hand, working something out. "And very smart. Very, very smart." Ruth, who had formed her own opinions on the matter, made a non-committal sound that could mean anything. She leaned slightly toward Nick, close enough that only he could hear. "She's lovely, isn't she?" Nick nodded once, but his eyes moved briefly to the entrance. Lorenzo touched Ruth's elbow. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. The city commissioner just arrived." He straightened with the pleased authority of a man being offered something he wanted and steered her smoothly toward the other side of the room. As he went, his eyes found Ruby's over the crowd and moved, once, deliberate, toward Nick. Ruby received this with the serene blankness of a woman who had absolutely no idea what he meant and was doing it perfectly. She crossed toward Nick with the unhurried ease of someone who happened to be moving in that direction, which she had been planning to do for the past 4 minutes, and stopped in front of him with a small, pleasantly surprised smile that suggested she'd only just noticed him standing there. She had noticed him 4 minutes ago. "Oh, I'm so sorry. We didn't actually get to meet just now." She made a small, gracious gesture in the direction of wherever she'd apparently been needed, which remained as a location entirely theoretical. She extended her hand. "Ruby Calvetti. Dominic Ferraro." He shook it. "Ferraro." She tilted her head as if running the name through a filing system that had plenty under F and nothing useful. "The group, of course, but you, specifically?" A small, genuine-looking frown. "I don't think we've ever crossed paths." A photographer materialized at her shoulder. "Miss Calvetti, could I get a photo for your social media?" Ruby's expression shifted to something gracious and regretful. "I'm really not a social media person," she glanced at Nick. "Privacy is very important to me." The photographer stood there with the look of a man whose reality had just been rearranged without his consent. He had spent last Tuesday editing a 47-image brunch carousel for this account. He had notifications on. He recognized the shoes. He walked away without another word, looking personally betrayed. A waiter arrived with cocktails. Ruby reached for a glass, then paused. "Sorry, is there celery in this?" The waiter considered the martini in his hand. "It's a martini, ma'am. There's no celery in—" Ruby set the glass back on the tray with great care. "I have a very serious celery allergy. I have to be so careful." She looked past him. "Is there anything else?" Nick's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're allergic to celery?" Ruby turned toward him, as if only now remembering he was standing there. Her fingers went to her collarbone. "Since I was a child. Terrible thing." Nick was watching her. "Same." He kept his voice neutral. "Interesting coincidence." "Oh, imagine!" Ruby's eyes were wide and clear, and giving away nothing whatsoever. She tilted her head, as if genuinely charmed by the thought. "If we were ever—" She laughed, bright and a little too quick, a sound that didn't quite match the rest of her careful performance. "Well, no celery in that house." He studied her, beautiful, composed, charming, and underneath all of it, the faint sensation of a note played in a key that didn't quite match the song, like a perfectly hung painting that was, if you measured it, 2 degrees off. He tilted his head. "Peculiar." "I'm a little surprised you don't know me, Ruby." His voice had an easy, playful edge. "We're your largest competitor." Ruby's smile held its position. "The Ferraro Group. Absolutely." She gestured vaguely in his direction, as if he were a footnote in a document she'd skimmed once and returned. "But you, specifically. Nothing. Not a thing." At that exact moment, 2 young women appeared at Ruby's side, carrying armfuls of miniature dog garments. This was not a coincidence. It was, however, going to look like one, which was the entire point of the small, unhurried signal Ruby had sent in their direction approximately 40 seconds earlier, while Nick was looking at the cocktail tray. "Miss Calvetti, we make luxury clothing for rescue dogs. These are some of our samples. Would you consider supporting us?" Ruby turned to them with the full force of her attention. "Oh, you darlings!" Her hand went to her chest. "There is nothing I wouldn't do for animals. Nothing." She reached for the nearest sample, a tiny cream wool jacket, and lifted it with both hands. "Look at these. Just look at them. Oh my God, these are just—" She stopped. Her eyes went wide. She swayed sideways into Nick with the momentum of someone who had not planned to sway sideways into Nick, which she absolutely had. He caught her by the waist, his eyes going to her face. "Are you all right?" Her voice dropped to something fragile and bewildered. "The wool? I can't. When I touch it, everything just goes dizzy." He frowned. "Dizzy?" She pressed one hand to her cheek, the other still on his arm. "And the itching, everywhere, every time." She shook her head. "I should have known." Nick held her steady and looked at her. This beautiful, composed, apparently wool-sensitive woman who shared his celery allergy had never heard of him despite running the competing company and had just materialized a dog clothing stand at a precise moment. With the expression of a man doing very careful arithmetic and not yet sure what the total was. Lorenzo, still at Ruth's side, had been watching all of this with considerable interest. He leaned toward her. "Look at that." A nod in their direction. "Fast work, huh?" Ruth turned. Nick had Ruby against his side, her hand still on his arm, and the whole arrangement read considerably more intentional than it was. Ruth's mouth curved. "From rivals to partners, Lorenzo. Is that the plan?" Lorenzo spread his hands. "I have enormous respect for love." Ruth, who had been listening to Lorenzo express enormous respect for various things for the better part of 2 decades, rolled her eyes, with the fondness of a woman who found him ridiculous and had never quite managed to fully mean it. On the other side of the ballroom, Jennifer Adams had accepted a glass of champagne, found 3 veterinarians she vaguely knew from a conference, and settled into a conversation with the relief of someone who has found solid ground in unfamiliar water. She was doing fine. The room was beautiful. The champagne was cold. Someone was telling a story about a tortoise that was genuinely interesting. Then across the room, she caught a flash of red, champagne gold dress, red hair, and felt a lift of recognition because Ruby Calvetti was hard to miss and familiar faces were welcome. She said her excuse-me's and took a few steps in that direction, and then she saw him, or rather, she saw his back, his shoulders, one arm around a woman's waist, the woman's hand against his chest, the two of them tilted toward each other in the easy, unhurried way of people who had nowhere else to be. She knew that posture. She knew those shoulders. She had known them since she was 13 years old. Her champagne glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Ruby Calvetti. Red hair, champagne silk, one hand resting against his chest, and Nick's head was tilted toward hers, close enough that whatever he was saying was only for her. Nick Brown. Jen stood very still. Ruby was still against his side, her eyes fixed on his face, blinking up at him with the expression of a woman in considerable distress. "Everything's on fire." Her voice was faint and suffering. "My whole body." Nick frowned. "Sorry?" "The itching." She shifted slightly in his arms. "My shoulder, the back of it." Her eyes were wide and patient and waiting. Would you mind?" He considered her for a moment. "You want me to scratch your back?" "Oh, it's unbearable. Please." She held her forearms away from her sides and demonstrated, scratching at her own elbows with the focused misery of someone who had absolutely no choice. "Wool allergy. Haven't you ever had it?" "Actually," Nick said, "I have." He was thinking privately about celery allergies and wool allergies and the specific mathematics of coincidence, and the numbers were not adding up in a way he found comfortable. Ruby batted her lashes, puckered her lips, and whispered, "Dominic, my shoulder. Please. I'm going to faint now." Nick set his hand on her shoulder blade and scratched, once, carefully, with the expression of a man who was doing something he hadn't entirely agreed to. "Oh." Ruby's eyes fluttered closed for a moment. "Thank you. Oh, that's... Yes, right there. Thank you." Across the room, Lorenzo was watching this with his glass halfway to his mouth and a look of reluctant admiration on his face. "Go, girl," he thought. "Go." His eyes softened for a moment into something older, something he rarely let surface. There had been a time, Ruby's mother, a summer in Capri, a very complicated situation that he preferred not to examine in detail, and looking at Ruby sometimes, he had to wonder. Then he thought about Ruby specifically. The poodle she'd tried to train to answer her emails, the time she'd locked herself in a Maserati for 40 minutes because she'd forgotten her own code. He drank his champagne. No, no way, absolutely not. Nick was still scratching Ruby's shoulder, wearing the expression of a man being very professional about a situation he had not seen coming, when Ruby opened her eyes and looked up at him. "Oh, Dominic." "Yes, yes." Her voice was warm, grateful, slightly theatrical. "Oh, that was great, thank you." Then, from directly behind him, close, unmistakable, and entirely in the wrong place, "Dominic." He turned. Jen was standing right there in a simple black dress, champagne glass frozen halfway to her mouth, her eyes going from Ruby to him and back again. "Dominic?" she said again. "Who the hell is Dominic?" Thanks so much for listening to Jen and Nick's story. I really hope you enjoyed part 1. Part 2 will be up within the next 3 days. So if you want me to continue the story, please comment part 2 below. That honestly gives me the motivation to keep writing. And if you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.